And my co-presenter is Haegel, and she's totally disengaged. She's getting her microphone. And right now we're representing the Sexual Misconduct Committee. And I think what we're doing, I know what we're doing, is giving you an update on where we are in the committee's work. We actually have some goals. Locate ourselves in the work that we've done and the work that we're doing. Share lessons, some of the patterns that we see emerging and what we're learning from that. And then engage community members. The goal, one of our goals, is that you all walk away from this with increased understanding about how it is. It's loud, isn't it? Yeah. How it is that we all contribute to this shared effort of responsibly preventing and responding to sexual misconduct at risk. And before we continue, I just want to acknowledge the incredibly austere and intimidating nature of our visual. I hope that whatever is lost work.
Can't hear you anymore. Fix it first.
Okay, how's that? Okay. Those are goals. Outline, we're just going to talk about where we're seeing, what we're learning, and where we're going. And the why is really important, and this is the why of our work. First and foremost, we care a lot about our students and about our staff. We believe that all students and staff should have the opportunity to exist in a working or learning environment where they're free from the distraction and harm of sexual misconduct, harassment, and discrimination. And then beyond that, we work for an organization that teaches and models ethical leadership. And so we have some responsibility to prevent and address the potential threat of sexual misconduct in our community and also within our wider culture. I'm going to talk really briefly about the new policy because it's sort of the foundation of all the training that's going to come. But first, I just want to offer a few disclaimers. One, we're going to be talking pretty much exclusively about expeditions right now, about the field side. Two, we've done a lot of work in the last couple of years, in the last year and a half in particular, around student-to-student interactions. So we're going to shift our focus a little bit and talk more about staff-to-student and staff-to-staff interactions. And third, this is a really weighty topic. We're going to tread carefully and just ask that you all do the same. As with any conversation around sexual misconduct or sexual violence, we're going to begin by assuming that there are people in the room who both experienced sexual violence and also committed sexual violence. So I'll issue a request really similar from Jesse's yesterday morning. Just ask that you all take care of yourselves, whatever that means. Okay, so we have this new policy, and we believe it is much improved. There are a few things that it does. It provides for mandatory reporting. It provides for student amnesty in some situations. What the heck is that? Yeah?
If a student is reporting something around sexual misconduct and it relates to something that also violates the policy, they have amnesty over that.
Yeah, right. So if I'm a student and I am involved with something that is against the rules, like let's say I'm out drinking on a semester transition, and I come forward and I report sexual misconduct, and sort of key to my report is the fact that we have all been drinking together, I will have amnesty from the drinking in exchange for this report. The policy does a couple of, yeah.
Is that true for anybody who's reporting, or is that specifically if the person is the recipient of the harassment?
Potentially for anyone reporting. A couple other key elements. The new policy policy is gender expansive. And it defines a bunch of terms, including sexual misconduct. It also defines reporting. And there's more to come. We're going to get more clarity around the reporting structure. But for now, just know that you have a whole lot of choice in terms of which supervisor you engage if you choose to report sexual misconduct. So the policy is good. It is much improved, and we all need to get really familiar with it. So please read it if you haven't already. Make it accessible to yourselves and to your teams. And it would be incredibly naive to imagine that this document is going to affect the kind of social change we want to see by itself. We're talking about big, complex systems change, and we're going to need to influence the system in a lot of different ways. And we're going to talk a little bit later on about what are the ways that we're doing that. But we don't think we're done, I think is the message I want you to take away from that. Anna's back.
I know, mic'd up, ready to go.
Okay, sweet.
Great. I think I missed intros while I was trying to figure out how to put this contraction on. But I'm Anna Haegel. I'm the program manager at Knowles Rocky Mountain. What I'm going to share next with you all is just some examples. Things we're seeing and hearing that are examples of sexual misconduct or sexual harassment, instructor to instructor, instructor to student, that we've been hearing. And these are mostly examples from the last year, maybe 2 years, some of them. The reason we want to share some examples with you all is, one, we just need to acknowledge and affirm that we are not immune from this at Knowles. That problems of sexual misconduct and sexual harassment in the workplace are endemic in our society, and they are present at Knowles amongst Knowles field instructors. We also just want to provide examples of behaviors that just exemplify why we know and why we are also in the process of implementing, like why we know we need better training, better education, better systems for response, better systems for reporting. Because right now a lot of these incidents, I think we hope would be are preventable or could have come to light in better ways than how we had access to them. Like Emily mentioned earlier, we are making a deliberate choice to focus on field staff right now. So a lot of these examples are field staff and students. Deliberate choice to not talk about examples we have of in-town staff or examples of sexual misconduct occurring amongst in-town staff. They will be on this pretty big continuum of subtle to egregious. And part of that acknowledging that sexual misconduct and sexual harassment can be a very big continuum of behaviors. They're really big words to describe a lot of different behaviors. And they will be vague. And they are purposely vague to protect the identity of reporters or recipients of these incidents. So I'm just going to start naming some of these that we've had access to in the last year or so. We've had examples of instructor making out with a student at a semester transition. So an instructor that had just been that student's instructor, engaging in physical intimacy with them at a transition. Instructors reporting that they felt coerced into sexual relationships in the field, largely along usually power dynamics of CL to PL or CL to I. Instructors making out with or expressing romantic or sexual interest in a student shortly after graduation. Instructors making sexual innuendo, sexualized comments or jokes about or towards students in the field. Instructors feeling pressure to maintain a sexual relationship in the field, even if they wanted to end that, either out of a sense of coercion or power dynamic, or just out of keeping the peace, not wanting to engage in that conflict or that or fear of potential retribution or retaliation if they ended that relationship in the field. Instructors engaging in unwanted touch and like unwanted sexual advances in the tent space towards another instructor. Instructor kind of acting, like ignoring, acting dismissively, just in general acting really poorly to a co-instructor after that co-instructor rebuffed their advances in the field. And then lots of examples of instructors being intoxicated at Knowles locations and engaging in like unwanted sexual advances, unwanted pursuit, inappropriate touching of fellow staff or instructors in that space. The next place I'm headed is to talk a little bit about Knowles' response to those incidents. And we don't have a ton of time for this, but I want to like acknowledge that I just like threw out a bunch, like big list. I think that was like 10 or something like that. I'm just curious like how many folks are like surprised by that list I threw out. Is there any quick questions about that list?
When you said shortly after graduation, did you mean like 15 minutes or like a week?
Yeah, like a gamut. Like a range in there. But yeah, both. Yep.
Can you just speak to how you're hearing of these?
I can speak to like what I'm aware of. I think all the way from like how we would like reporting to happen, like fairly official channels of like an instructor feeling like they can trust their P soup or another supervisor saying that in the week. And then I think lots of it coming out in the nebulous interplay of professional and personal relationships at Knowles, like sitting around with friends, those pieces also happening. Like more, I think, almost feeling like lucky that we have access to them, that just the right person accidentally almost heard about them and like we're able to address them. Great, and we're happy to talk more about these after. I just want to make space for that real quick. I'm going to keep moving, but again, happy to like keep answering questions. We'll both be around at the break. Now I'm going to move on talking a little bit about Knowles's, the response that Knowles has had for, there's another slide. Yes. The responses that Knowles has had for the offender, and that is another deliberate choice in this presentation. We are not talking about responses and support we have had for the recipients of this behavior. So we're focusing on responses for the offender. More and more I'm getting, and I think we as a committee are getting access to a narrative of fear amongst instructors, like fear that Knowles is over-responding or that Knowles is firing instructors willy-nilly for like really subtle or low-level behaviors. And I guess part of my hope this morning is to like dispel that a little bit. This is tricky. Like we can't give a ton of details about responses and repercussions that have come. There are legal pieces in that like stop us from doing that as an organization. And there's also like a whole bunch of care for the anonymity and dignity and space of the recipients or reporters, where we can't be super open sometimes as an organization about specific events and our specific response to those events. And that's real, and I think it's a hard part where that lack of transparency can lead to a lot of fear or like uncertain narratives about response. But I guess like hoping to like, I have actually like the people I get to work with in some of like when we work on these problems, I feel really lucky and have like a lot of trust in our systems of trying to like understand these things and respond as well as we can. But I just want to lay out some of those responses. And they have ranged from what we would expect, like direct feedback, documentation and STEs of next steps, one-on-one training or education with someone in Knowles being a requirement for that person if they want to keep working, that they need to engage in education. We have suspended folks for a certain amount of time from field work or demoted instructors, largely from CL to PL is typically where that has come up. We have required alcohol treatment, engagement in like a alcohol recovery program as part of continuing to work for Knowles or be on Knowles property. And we have certainly made folks ineligible for hire and said that they are no longer welcome to work at Knowles or be on Knowles property. And tons of factors go into determining those responses. And I would say the biggest ones being severity, like what was the severity of that single incident? Is this pattern or repetitive behavior from this instructor? And how did that instructor show up to the feedback or the conversation around their behavior and understanding their impacts, whether that was on another instructor or student. Great. And then lastly, I just want to talk about why is this problematic? Also another slide. This seems really important to the presentation, so I'm going to put it back up there. It's a little late picture. It would rather be down there. Okay, why is this problematic? And I think for some people in the room, that might feel like a really obvious question. Like, why do we even need to say why this is problematic? Right, and it's really problematic on lots of big scale reasons, like sexual misconduct, sexual harassment, are problematic in a workspace or learning space. Big picture, they're really, like stifling. Like, it is almost impossible to perform at your best self or feel like you have a safe or positive work or learning environment if you're the recipient of sexual harassment or sexual misconduct. It can be really dehumanizing to be the recipient of that. It can be really delegitimizing, like you starting to doubt your own performance or why certain things are being, like, did you actually earn anything, or was this just all about someone being attracted to you? Does my performance even matter in this case? It could be really delegitimizing. And there's all sorts of like studies on mental health and physical health related to being recipients of sexual misconduct or sexual harassment. So on this really big scale, universal level, it's problematic for our staff and students. There's a few, I think, reasons that are like really unique to Knowles that can amplify some of this, or really, I think, highlight some of these problematic pieces. We work in a super unique, intimate, cohabitation environment as a norm that takes place in like an isolated working environment, where we don't maybe necessarily have access to support networks, easy access to reporting, being able just to walk away from the situation. There's tons of power dynamics present in our workspace around assessments, promotion, feedback, seniority, future work possibilities, and like a whole bunch of muddling in that when we start to talk about things like consent or coercion in the field, and which of those is actually happening in that power dynamic. We have this, like, I think one of the coolest things about working for Knowles, and one of the hardest things, is this like really interwoven web of professional and personal relationships that are ongoing constantly. Like, I'm not working, but I'm at a Knowles location right now, and it's still engaging in professional interactions. Or I'm starting this friendship or romantic relationship in the field, and that's really personal, but I'm also still in this professional space. And that, I think, is muddled and tangled in ways that are quite unique to Knowles. And finally, we form really like close, sometimes emotionally intense relationships with our students that are like profound and integral to what we do, and I think can also just amplify the impact on students if they're feeling this behavior from an instructor. We have heard directly from students of essentially like a spiral of doubt after a course of like, did I actually earn that grade? Was any of my performance real? Or was it just about my instructor being attracted to me? Right, so it can be like, I think, pretty delegitimizing of that situation. Yeah, I'll just leave it there. Next slide.
Anna, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Are there, in the scenarios that you're giving up instructors and instructors, are there particular locations that's happening more in?
My understanding is
Sorry, I missed the now. Particular what?
locations. My understanding is no, or like that I don't have like specific numbers, but that it is, I bet we have examples from every location, that it's like widespread, is my understanding. Is that, you know?
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you asked that question, Lynn, because we're going to give a bunch of pitfalls right now, and they're so common. Like, if you any of the examples that I'm about to give, just know that these are repeating examples, and I see myself in all of these. Okay, I'm gonna give, like, again, this totally arbitrary number of 11 pitfalls, and this is just how I have chosen to organize this in my brain. Feel free to write it down if you want to, but don't like spread it around too much. This is not a definitive list, but these are things that we're seeing. And these are things that we're seeing in the field with CLs, with PLs, and we're seeing it with administrators too. And one is assuming an isolated incidence. So I'm an instructor, I'm watching student behavior, I see something that seems sort of low grade or innocuous, but also problematic. I can make an assumption that this is the one and only time that this behavior is playing out, and I can miss what ends up being quite severe when it's repeated either with the same individual or across individuals. And we see the same thing with instructors. Program supervisors being like, yeah, I see that this instructor had favorites and spent a lot of time with female identified students, and it's just one course. Slow, incomplete investigation. This is a real area for growth at Mills. This is something that we're going to spend some dedicated time doing on Friday in the P-Suit training. We are almost always not gathering adequate information to make a responsible decision soon enough. And so what that means is sometimes our students have left. They've graduated and gone home, and we're trying to manage really messy pieces of information. There are a lot of reasons why it's hard to do a complete investigation. Like social norms tell us that we should not be asking other people about sex. We worry about sort of re-traumatizing people who've been affected, and it's a muscle we need to grow. Failure to recognize supervisory responsibility, again, so common. This could be someone comes to me after hours and shares a story that's really problematic, and I respond in friendship and as a peer, but not in my seat as someone who works in the field staffing office. Supervisor relationships are slippery at Knowles because they change a lot. We move in and out of seasonal positions. I could be a course leader on one course and then an I on my next course. But recognizing that when I'm a CL, when I'm the field staffing director at a barbecue, I have responsibility that I can't abdicate. And taking that responsibility seriously, both in my support to a recipient, but also in holding an offender accountable. Something I've heard so often is they shared this with me as a friend from a supervisor. Taking feedback at face value, again, we see this a lot. Think of it sort of like an iceberg. Oftentimes what appears above the surface is stuff like, I think so-and-so should think about physical boundaries. Or so-and-so should spend more time with all students. Or it's like really subtle stuff. And if we approach with curiosity, we might learn that there's actually a lot more to the story. Failure to recognize potential for harm outside a formal report. Anna alluded to this a little bit. In my experience, the vast majority of reports, they come through informal channels. And it makes sense because, experiencing harassment or experiencing sexual violence is a really disorienting and decentering experience for many. And so it would make sense that our language would reflect that. Oftentimes reports are not organized. And they come in the form of things like, I would ask not to be staffed with this person again in the future. Or, I think I might like to drop this course. Consideration for offender over recipient. This sort of matches what we're observing in our inclusive course cultures and the way that we're approaching equity work at the school. we have a default empathy for the person whose career might be affected, who may not get courses downstream of significant feedback. And that's something we just need to check in ourselves. Deference to a reporter who downplays impacts. Again, really common for people who experienced harassment or violence to make accommodations for, or explain, or to empathize strongly with the person who's harmed them. And if that is the only thing that we're using to guide our decision making, that's a problem. We should have clear ideas about the acceptability of behaviors outside of a reporter making a request for consequences. That makes sense? Yeah.
Not really. I was going to ask a question about how to respond if someone is coming to you in that as a friend context with a report and saying, I don't want this to go anywhere.
Right. Well,
Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah. Well, what do you think? What guidance would you offer that person?
I guess the first thing would be to, first try to empathize, validate, build, acknowledge, build trust, and then show that I'm ready to be an ally with them and help them recognize the importance of bringing this forward and the support that Knowles as an institution is ready to give for that process.
Great. I mean, what you're describing is really tricky. It's awful. Because we don't want someone who's experienced harm to experience more harm. And we also need to act. And like supervisors certainly have a responsibility to act, and the goal behind mandatory reporting is that if I know that I'm confiding in Phil, I also know that Phil has some duty to share that information in a way that it's going to be useful. But if I report and I say something like, listen, I want to let you know that this thing happened, and I just don't want to make a big deal of it, I don't want it to go anywhere, or I can really understand where this person is coming from, that should not be the primary guiding principle in how we figure out consequences. Struggle to connect concepts of identity and power to sexual misconduct. I really like the way that Jesse did this yesterday in his talk. I thought he did such a nice job of laying bare some of the connections between misogyny, transphobia, homophobia, and violence. And folks who hold marginalized identities were just much more likely to experience violence. And that's not a coincidence. It's on the basis of those identities. One way that shows up, one way that shows up in the field, I think, is again, like not being able to anticipate how a culture of sexist language creates the conditions where sexual misconduct is more likely to occur. Oh, no. All right, we're almost there. Last three. The tendency to forget that Knowles at any time is a workplace. Anna talked about this too, like hanging out on the third floor of the Noble Hotel on a campus. Even if I'm off contract, I'm on Knowles property. Or maybe like a little bit messier, I'm with a group of people that I just worked a course with. Or like I'm with a group of people who I only know because of work. And maybe our working location is remote enough that I kind of don't have other social options in terms of where I'm living and who I'm interacting with. That really makes it challenging to evaluate, to gauge, and also to obtain consent when there's this forced quality of our interactions. And something we're paying a lot of attention to here, and I think we maybe need more guidance or help around, is the relationship of alcohol to this, kind of like alcohol in social settings. Default belief that non-consensual behaviors are normal and acceptable. We live in a culture where sexual harassment and misconduct is endemic, and all of us are reckoning with that. And then the belief that this doesn't happen at roles. And again, this is so widespread. Like we work in this really tightly knit community. To speak for myself, I have a ton of respect for my coworkers and the members of my community. And it's really hard to imagine that that we're harming each other in ways that are unseen. And I hold that and also know that, like, again, we live in a culture where sexual violence is endemic, and it would be, again, so naive to imagine that expedition behavior, as we've conceived of it in the past, like being a collection of just like really nice, hardworking people, would be the only pathway out of that. Okay. Any questions you want to ask me about the 11 official pitfalls?
I think I'm going to talk about where we're going. So I think that, like Emily alluded a little bit in our introduction, like recognition that this is a huge, daunting topic requires like cultural transformation at every level of an organization to really address these topics. We're like in the midst of doing a few things to start addressing that cultural shift. Some of that has already started, like Liz, Emily referenced early on. Like we've been focusing a bunch on student-to-student incidents of sexual misconduct, right, and starting that cultural shift amongst our instructor pool. Other things that are currently happening or coming down the pipeline, starting conversations and training with directors at the school and other supervisors so that they can actually be effective in working to prevent, respond to, and report incidents of sexual misconduct or harassment that take place under their purview or amongst those they supervise. That training piece feels like vital right now in a place that we're like, we aren't there yet, but we're in the midst of starting that training for supervisors and directors. We'll be doing some work with instructor course grads this spring, where as part of their like end of course talk and onboarding, there will be additional training in there around sexual misconduct, sexual harassment, culture at Knowles, expectations, what it means, like a lot of like the pitfalls and problematic pieces we talked about within this work environment. So that'll be happening as part of onboarding of IC grads. We're going to run, Emily and Scott are running an investigation training at the program supervisor meetings this week, trying to get PSUPs to be able to better respond to and help report reports of sexual misconduct or harassment that come to them. Like Emily referenced, like even being able to like identify those little tips of the iceberg comments, and as our closest connection to field staff and students, having those folks be able to be much more effective in that role. And we are also in the midst of working on a school-wide training that will be required for all current and new staff. It's still in the like working on phase, but it will most likely be some sort of like online training module that will be, we do not and do not want it to be the thing of why sexual misconduct training gets made fun of on shows like The Office, right? Like actually trying to make a training that is relevant to this work environment, this culture, this group of humans. And so working on that, and I imagine that will roll out in stages, and you'll all hear more information about that. Great. There's a bunch in this. It's huge. It's daunting. It can feel, I think, a little bit like, what do I need to do with this information going into the summer? We brainstormed if we were to name 3 concrete-esque takeaways engaging in sexual or romantic relationships is verbal, ongoing, and enthusiastic. And if those three things are present, it can at least help us remove some of the like muddled grayness around power dynamic, isolated work environment, like coercion versus consent. And that if we can like live in this as like a definition of what consent should look like as a group of employees. That power is a very real, power and power dynamic is a very real part of our work environment and can act all the time to muddle consent. And that we work in a really unique, complex, and tangled work environment that can highlight, amplify, and confuse a bunch of these issues, and that we maybe just need to even tread more lightly and with more awareness constantly in how we are interacting with our coworkers and how we're interacting with students in these areas. Next slide. I'm not ready for that slide yet. So this committee, we welcome any input folks might have around like training opportunities or cultural shifts or responses they would like to see be present at Knowles. You should always feel free to approach any member of the Sexual Misconduct Systems Review Committee, of whoever feels comfortable to you to approach. And that is myself, Emily, Liz Toohey, Scott Robertson, Erica Hathaway, Robin Larson, and Drew Lehman are the members of that committee. And if none of those are the person you want to talk to, find that person you do trust, a program supervisor, a location manager, director, like whatever that can then like share with us. But we would love to have access to your all's input and ideas and opinions about this stuff. Okay. We're going over time, but right now it seems like I'm going rogue and I'm just going to keep going. We're going to do one more thing and come back together and end this so that you also have a nice long break before the next set of workshops. Right, we've talked a lot about organizational change that needs to happen, cultural change, and that work is real and has to happen. It is like the responsibility of leadership at this school, leadership applications. And there is also like personal work in there that has to happen. And what we would like for folks to do right now is just turn to a neighbor. We're just going to spend a few minutes talking about this prompt. So if we're talking about like a personal, within your sphere of influence action item going into the summer, what is one thing you could do to positively influence a culture of prevention, response to, seems to be somewhere. Is that? Oh God, I totally broke it. One thing you can do to positively impact the prevention of, the responding to, or the reporting of sexual misconduct within Knowles. So if you think about what your position is and what your sphere of influence might be. We just talk for a few minutes, we'll come back together, wrap things up, and so get a break. So just turn to a neighbor and try to name something that you could do this summer.
What? Oh. Yeah. I was just, hear this to make it seem more real to me. The part of it, you know.
So I had a project too. Before that, I was just
Well, it used to happen a lot when I first Oh yeah, big time. Yeah. That's right.
And there were numbers coming up like 60% of women. And Missy was talking about that.
Oh,
And she said no. And then she started thinking about it. So yeah, I had that granddaughter. And I told my mom, and she said, oh, you just like her. And the conversations are with my neighbor across the street. She said the same thing. No way, it's not that high. No, it's 100%. And she said, the first she said, no, it's never happened to me. And she said, I was working in Washington, D.C. And I was investing my business.
yeah.
To bicycling faster and smacked her in the road.
Really?
And she goes, I think you're right. I think it is 100%. Because I've been, I'm not going to use the word victim on the other side. If it's happening to you,
Right.
I mean, not since 2 days ago. So, I wear a coat.
Oh, really?
Graduation.
Oh, really?
And I need to remind her
Yeah.
at least March each day, that's what I wear on the and it's not
Yeah, right.
and it doesn't bother me, and I have great lines.
Yeah, right.
They could be worse than the question. But it still would be absolutely wrong for me to ask anyone to do it. She's wearing right now. Are you wearing it?
And folks should keep having the conversation for sure.
I don't know if this is other than the flight.
I just want to end by, like both I think Emily and I, just thanking you all for being here this morning, being willing to listen and engage in this topic, and want to thank you now for like the work you will move forward doing it. Hopefully there's either a higher level of awareness or a higher level of ability to maybe go talk about this topic or respond if you're hearing about this issues of sexual misconduct or incidents. Also want to acknowledge we are out of time. We won't have time right now to take questions, and that both Emily and I will be milling about up front if anyone wants to come chat or ask any clarifying questions or give opinions or anything like that. We're open to that. But now I think our goal is to get you all, I think there's like snacks coming out. Is that a true statement? Well, I said it now, there better be snacks. And that the next round of workshops will start at 10:30.